Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and these are my running back rankings for Week 11. As always, I'm intended for half PPR on this channel, and we begin with the players who are unranked due to injury. Looks like Isaiah Pacheco is getting healthier. His practice window was opened, but not expecting him in this week's game, maybe Week 12, probably as late as Week 13. So good news for Pacheco, but I didn't rank him. I also didn't rank Zach Moss, who's on IR. Same with Marshawn Lloyd, who's been on IR for a while. Dameon Pierce missed last week. I think he will be out again. Same with Jamaal Williams, who's missed 2 games in a row. And Kendre Miller is on IR as well. So these players are injured, not ranked for me. And these players are on bye. Tyrone Tracy, Devin Singletary of the Giants, not available this week. Chuba Hubbard, Jonathan Brooks, and Miles Sanders of the Panthers also on bye. Same with Rashad White, Bucky Irving, and Sean Tucker of the Tampa Bay Bucks. And James Conner, Trey Benson, and Amari DiMercado of Arizona, the Cardinals running backs, also on bye. So every player here on the screen is unranked. You cannot start them in Week 11. But we begin at the top where Christian McCaffrey is my number one play this week versus Seattle at home. He will dominate. That's what he's done in the past against the Seahawks. An average of 22 fantasy points per game in 4 career games, including the playoffs, with the Niners. He has even better numbers against them with the Panthers, but since he's been a San Francisco 49er, he averages 142 yards with 4 touchdowns in 4 games. He will dominate once again, and I think he's the number one running back. It's a top 5 matchup. They allow 138 rushing yards per game on 5.6 yards per carry. McCaffrey will go off, and in his first game back this season, in his debut against the Bucks, he had 19 touches, 6 catches, 107 yards. He did not find the end zone, which was kind of shocking. That's normally the guarantee for McCaffrey, but 13.7 points represents his floor. I think he goes well over 20 in this matchup. So he is back to elite. Maybe he won't be ranked at number 1 next week, but this week, I do trust CMC. Number 2, I have Saquon Barkley versus Washington, who I kind of wanted to put at number 1, but last week, I have no concerns with his usage. He only had 15 touches. It was a blowout win on Sunday against Dallas on the road. Meanwhile, Kenny Gainwell and Will Shipley both combined for 17 touches. So I really like that game plan. Maybe you were pissed off about it if you had Saquon in fantasy, but they have a Thursday night game against a much more important divisional rival, the Commanders, the only actual threat in division. So this game is way more important, and not only is Saquon rested, but the Commanders defense is not. They played 78 snaps against the Steelers last week. It was a down-to-the-wire 1-point game, and fatigue could set in the second half for the Commanders' run defense. So I absolutely trust Saquon this week. The matchup has given up 117 rushing yards per game on 5.1 yards per carry, along with 6 touchdowns over the last 5 games. The Commanders are vulnerable on the ground. So love this spot for Saquon. I know last week he didn't score a touchdown, but I don't think Jalen Hurts vultures him multiple times in this game. So he will score a touchdown guaranteed, and he's actually averaging 144 yards per game the last month. He's insane. The floor's elite, and the only times he doesn't pay off at this expectation is if Hurts scores every rushing touchdown. So not going to happen this week. Saquon back to number 2, definitely a player everyone is starting. And that's the case with every player at the top of these rankings. You know for a fact you're starting these studs, but I'm just giving you my personal take on the nuances of who will be slightly better than one other guy. And at number 3, I think Bijan Robinson has now returned the investment you expected when you drafted him. It's taken a little while longer than we thought. The hype we gave Bijan was insane. But Bijan over the last month is averaging 22 fantasy points per game on 22 touches, 5 catches, 135 yards, and 4 touchdowns over those 4 games. That is the RB1 in points per game during that stretch. He's been fantastic. He has 100% lived up to the hype. So all the expectations we gave him are coming true, and this matchup does rank top 10, so no concerns at all. While they only allow 3.6 yards per carry, the Broncos are tough on the ground. They also give up 7 catches per game for 58 receiving yards per game. That is the most receiving yards allowed to the running back position in the entire NFL over the last 5 weeks. So definitely trust Bijan. He will absolutely pay off, especially in the screen game. He will catch a lot of passes. So he scored 2 touchdowns last week. He's good for 1 this week. Love Bijan. Definitely a stud. Top 5 running back this season. Number 4 is Derrick Henry at Pittsburgh, who's been the RB1 on the year, but he did not pay off last week at his full potential. Like I expected, I ranked him at number 8 last week. I did downgrade him because of the matchup. The Bengals are kind of tough, but knowing he would score a touchdown, he was still a must start, and that is what he will be this week again. The Steelers actually have given up 7 touchdowns to running backs over the last 5 weeks. 3 of them came against the Commanders to Ekeler and Jeremy McNichols last week. So you know for a fact Derrick Henry will score. He gets a mini bye week to rest up, and the volume will not be a concern at all. In division, they will ride Henry as much as they can. So he will be great. He's the RB4 over the last month, 19.6 points, 5 touchdowns. He scored 14 touchdowns in 10 games this year. No one's benching Derrick Henry. You're also not benching Jahmyr Gibbs. I almost ranked him at number 1 given this matchup. The Jaguars are one of the best matchups you can find. Number 3 over the last 5 weeks. They've allowed 24.8 points per game to the position, 116 rushing yards per game, 4 yards per carry, but 6 touchdowns, another 36 receiving yards per game, and 5 catches to the position every week. So you know that Gibbs will catch more of those passes, and he's also been more involved than Montgomery. As of late, it has shifted in his favor. Gibbs is almost putting up twice as many fantasy points as Montgomery over the last 4 games. 18.9 for Gibbs, about only 10 per game for Montgomery. So it's definitely pivoting in his favor, and with a lot of teams on bye that are really good matchups for running backs, this is one of the few matchups you can find that actually does rank in the top 5. So love Gibbs this week. If it wasn't for Montgomery's presence on the field, I might have ranked him at number 1. The Lions probably score 50 at home against the Jags. It'll probably look like that Titans game, and you know Gibbs will dominate. So 100% locking your lineup, top 5 running back for me this week. The ceiling is open. Number 6, I got Joe Mixon at Dallas, who's an elite floor play every week. He's the RB3 in points per game the last 4, averaging 19.9 points, 27 touches per game, 2 catches, 114 yards, and 5 touchdowns. Especially without Nico Collins, they've leaned on him like crazy. He's averaging 19.9 points per game. So you know he's a stud. You know he's a lock in your lineup. They paid him an extension, and they are using him. I'm sure the Bengals miss him on the field. So although Chase Brown is playing well, Mixon is far better, and the volume is elite. The floor is locked into top 10 production. I feel low ranking him at 6, but I just love the matchups a little more for other players. His matchup is number 14 on the board. It could be a little better, but he will go over 100 yards and a touchdown. That is a lock for Mixon. Number 7, I also trust Kyren Williams. There's no way you're benching Kyren, but he has given you less than 15 points per game the last month. Only 92 yards per game. That is low for what he used to do earlier in the season. It will bounce back. I'm not worried about Kyren, but with 3 touchdowns and 1 fumble, that's the main reason why he's dipped below 15 points, but he'll probably give you 20 plus very soon. Last week was a weird game where the offense completely underperformed against the Dolphins defense. So kind of shocking. The Dolphins defense wasn't anywhere near as good before that matchup, and maybe they just figured things out and had a good game plan to shut down Kyren. But he still had 80 yards, 5 catches last week. He'll easily bounce back. And on the road here against a top 8 matchup, the Patriots give up 132 rushing yards per game on 4.7 yards per carry. I 100% trust Kyren to pay off. So must-win game for the Rams. He's a big part of their offense. 23 touches per game will keep him as a top 10 play. Number 8, I have DeVon Achane versus Las Vegas, who didn't play lights out last week, but is still a must-start and still in this elite high-end tier at running back. He is the RB2 in points per game in his last 4 with Tua, an average of 21.4 points per game. But if you want to just look at the last 4 games straight up, he is giving you 17.3 points per game, over 100 yards with 3 touchdowns, and his work in the passing game is still elite. He's still being used as a wide receiver 1, essentially. He gets the most targets in this offense. 6.5 catches per game his last 4 with Tua. So love Achane. He has a locked-in floor. He's always going to be a top 10 play. And as long as the quarterback's healthy, Achane remains in your lineup. This matchup is top 11, so no downgrade at all. They've given up 6 touchdowns over the last 5 weeks, so his odds to score are pretty high. And in the passing game, he is a lock every week. Number 9, I got Kareem Hunt at Buffalo, and I think here is where we step down a slight tier, but I still expect like 16 plus points from the rest of these players moving forward in this tier. Kareem Hunt, I think, is at the top because his volume is insane. In the last 4 games, he's given you 24 touches every single week, about 2.8 catches, 91 yards, 4 touchdowns. And last week, although he didn't find the end zone, he was held to only 2.5 yards per carry versus Denver. He had 14 rush attempts for 35 yards on the ground. But he still had 100 yards from scrimmage. Patrick Mahomes sent him 10 targets, 7 catches for Hunt, 65 yards on top of the 35 on the ground. So as long as Pacheco doesn't play, you cannot bench Kareem Hunt. So he's a top 10 option over the last 4 games. He's averaging 16.5 points per game, and that ranks as RB7 in that span. So the matchup is decent, ranks top 13 against Buffalo. No downgrade in general, and I do think they can exploit the passing game again with Kareem Hunt. The Bills give up 6 catches per game for just under 50 receiving yards per game, and that is on the high end of the matchup spectrum. So love that for Hunt. He will keep it rolling in the passing game. Expect more targets. Number 10, I have Alvin Kamara versus Cleveland, who's also a player to expect high volume in the passing game every single week. That's what Kamara will get. He's averaging 5.8 catches over the last 4. However, not a single touchdown, but the floor's still good for 14.6 points because of 117 total yards on just under 22 touches per game. Given their depleted wide receiver core and Olave being on IR for at least 3 more weeks, this volume is guaranteed. Kamara's just a stud, a bust-proof must-start option. The only trepidation is that when they do get to the goal line, it's so obvious that Kamara probably gets the ball. Sometimes he's a bit of a decoy, and sometimes they pivot to Taysom Hill when they punch it in for a touchdown. So that's why he's not scoring. It could continue, but if it ever happens, you're definitely cracking 20-plus points. Without it, you still get 14. So love Kamara. He's a very trustworthy, guaranteed top 12 play every week rest of season. Number 11, I have Josh Jacobs at Chicago, and Jacobs has been really good, the RB8 over his last 4 games. An average of 19.8 touches, 2.8 catches, 104 yards, and 3 touchdowns in those last 4 games. That's an average of 16.3 points per game. So very trustworthy, kind of the safest floor you can find. I kind of want to rank him in the same tier as guys like Kyren Williams and DeVon Achane, to be honest with you. But he's not that far behind them. This matchup against Chicago is overall league average in fantasy, but they allow 119 rushing yards and 5.1 yards per carry over the last 5 weeks. That is where Jacobs will shine. The targets have not totally been trustworthy for him, but on the ground he should dominate. And the Packers are going to really light up the scoreboard, possibly shut out the Bears in Chicago. So especially if that 5+ yards per carry metric holds, Jacobs is bust proof. And in his last 3 games versus the Bears, while it was with the Raiders, not quite trustworthy, he is averaging 15.8 points on 20 touches, 84 yards per game with 3 touchdowns in those 3 games. He should score. That is what I'm expecting with the Packers this week. So love Jacobs. I trust his floor. Guaranteed 15 points against Chicago. Number 12, I have Jonathan Taylor at the Jets, and kind of feel too low on him, but he's still in the same tier. And this Joe Flacco offense appears to be capped. Not quite ideal, and last week he got vultured by Tyler Goodson. I doubt it happens all the time, but if it ever happens again, how many more touchdowns do you actually trust to happen in this offense? Flacco is not playing well. He's turning it over a lot. I don't really see why they are forced to stick with Flacco, but at the moment they're sticking with him. And against the Jets, it's not like the best matchup overall. It is top 10, but it's pretty touchdown dependent, and I don't fully trust that to hit for Taylor. He scored 2 touchdowns over the last 4 games. And if it's 50-50, while you are expecting 100 yards from him, without that touchdown, you probably won't go over 15 points. That's what happened last week, and that's why, although he's a must start, I don't rank him top 10. At number 12, though, no one's benching him. Don't get cute. If he does score a touchdown, though, I don't see him cracking the top 5. I see him as more like RB7 as a best case scenario. So just more of a high-end RB2, in my opinion. Running back's just so loaded this season. That is probably good for 18 points. Number 13 is Chase Brown at the Chargers. And although I'm worried about this matchup, it ranks bottom 3. I still think you have to start Brown no matter what. His volume is insane with Zach Moss on IR. Khalil Herbert's no threat at all. And last week he just had 11 targets against the Ravens. So even if he can't get going on the ground, which I'm a little worried about, the Chargers only give up 82 rushing yards per game, but a lot of that is game script dependent. They also allow 4.8 yards per carry. He could be okay if the game script benefits running the ball. But the Chargers, where they're elite on defense, is the fact that they have only given up 1 running back touchdown the entire season. Not a single one over the last 5 games. The only running back to have scored a touchdown on them is Samaje Perine back in week 4 on the ground. So maybe it's just Perine being that elite, but they've stopped some decent running backs this season, and it probably happens again against Chase Brown. But you know the volume's going to be great. Over his last 4 games, he's seeing 21.3 touches per game, 4.5 catches, 85 total yards per game, 3 touchdowns, but he did fumble as well. That's an average of 14.7 points per game. That's RB11 during that sample size. So I trust him for sure. Definitely a high floor play, but I'm a little worried he doesn't score a touchdown, and that's where the ceiling is starting to fade away from these players as we move down the rankings. It took until RB13 to actually be concerned, but even in a tough matchup, I still think Chase Brown is a must-start, guaranteed lock in your lineup, given his volume as of late. Number 14, I have Breece Hall versus the Colts, and Breece is not safe to score a touchdown. While he is averaging 100 yards per game, only 16.5 touches, 3.3 catches, you'd expect the volume to be higher, and especially when he gets vultured by Braylon Allen, it is very annoying. With only 1 touchdown the last 4 games, an average of 13.1, ranks as RB21 in that span. He has not been a top 20 play on a per game basis the last month. So while there have been several games where he hasn't really eclipsed 10 points, it's been annoying for that to happen. He's still bust proof, and inevitably he will find pay dirt. So still trusting him. The Colts allow 117 rushing yards per game to running backs this season. So I think he will go over 100 yards if they use him properly. But he's still one of the players you cannot bench. At number 15, you also cannot bench Kenneth Walker at San Francisco, but I trust him just as much as any player I have ranked above him, honestly. He's still ingrained that highlight play in my mind. I cannot forget his somersault flip over the defender to pick up a first down. That, the Saquon hurdle, and the Garrett Wilson one-handed catch, I think are the 3 best highlight plays of the year. So that is why Walker is so enticing. He's just a tremendous athlete, but so is everybody else above him on this list, and his volume has been a little shaky in this offense. For some reason, they're not running it like crazy with Walker. 19.8 touches is still pretty good, but it relies on 4.3 catches as well. There's a chance that during the bye, they decide to give him a lot more work on the ground. I would like to see that happen. I think he is capable of really paying off on more work, but he is a bit touchdown dependent as of late. Only 80 yards per game on average on 20 touches with 4.3 catches. His offensive line is a problem, though. It's really holding him back. His efficiency is only 4 yards per touch over the last month. Not good at all. So I do trust him for a 12-point floor, but in general, I never expect him to go over 100 yards. The ceiling's a bit capped with Geno at quarterback. Number 16 is where I have James Cook versus the Chiefs, and this matchup's terrible. It's the worst on the season. The Kansas City Chiefs only allow 11.1 points per game to opposing running backs this season. 49 rushing yards per game, 3.3 yards per carry. Only 1 running back touchdown that went to Rachaad White. 4.8 catches per game, 26 receiving yards per game. That is below average on a per game basis. So really tough matchup here. It's hard to get anything going on the ground against the Chiefs. But if you look at James Cook last season against Kansas City, including the playoff game, he actually plays really well. An average of 112 yards per game, 4.5 catches per game with 1 touchdown, an average of 16.5 points per game on 18.5 touches. So the volume is pretty legit. That's kind of more than he's even seen the last 4 himself. There's been a little less volume as he's been banged up, and Ray Davis has scored some long touchdowns. But James Cook is still a stud. He's been the RB10 over the last 4 games, averaging 15.1 on a per game basis. So I trust his floor. I think he's a safe play no matter what. Regardless of matchup, I don't think you can bench James Cook, but he definitely deserves a downgrade. It's not a good spot to be in, and I do think he's a bit touchdown dependent. But there's a chance that with all the injuries in their receiving core, they also send him a ton of targets as well. I think it's going to be a close game throughout, and I don't believe the game script will move away from running the ball. So even if he's not efficient, they will keep funneling him touches, and I do trust James Cook as a top 20 play, but not top 15, definitely not his best game. The matchup is a massive downgrade. Number 17 is Dave Montgomery versus Jacksonville, and he's not been great. Over the last 4 games, he ranks as RB 27, only averaging 10 points per game. That is nothing special. That's like on par with Austin Ekeler over the last 4. Eckler's actually been better in that sample size, but Montgomery still plays on an elite team, and their game script has been so strange the last month. There's games where they blow out their opponent, and even the receivers don't get any targets, and there's also some games where Jahmyr Gibbs goes lights out. He also exited a game with what was feared to be a concussion briefly, but he's okay, and he did fumble in that stretch as well. That's also limiting his fantasy production, but only 65 yards per game on average. That's not great, but against Jacksonville, I definitely see a bounce back performance for Montgomery. I still trust him as a reliable floor play, and he probably scores a touchdown, at least 1, if not 2, against the Jags. They're a great matchup. They rank top 3, allowing just under 25 points per game to the position, over 100 yards rushing, 36 receiving yards, and 6 touchdowns to running backs over the last 5 weeks. Montgomery will go off. The Lions probably score 50 plus points like they did against Tennessee a few weeks ago, and Montgomery will be a big part of that. I think 80 yards and a touchdown is guaranteed. I trust his floor for about 14 points. I think every running back up until this point is in the must-start territory. The top 17 should be locks in your lineup. However, moving forward, I think we enter a different tier altogether. There is definitely more risk involved, and I think they're more so flex plays than even running back 2s. Aaron Jones is my RB18 at Tennessee, who is questionable with a chest injury. He did exit last week's game. He missed the majority of the second half, but he also returned late in the 4th quarter as they tried to seal that game. So he probably suits up, but it's not a guarantee. You want to monitor his practice reports. And according to Kevin O'Connell, he's optimistic he will play, but probably going to be limited in practice. And that means he's probably limited a bit in the game, probably doesn't see a full snap share. He's 29 after all, and historically he always misses at least 2 games every season. So at some point that probably does happen. It could start this week, but at the moment I do think he will more than likely be on the field. So am ranking him top 20. The matchup is top 12. The Titans have given up 8 touchdowns to running backs over the last 5 weeks. Only 3.9 yards per carry. Not great in terms of yardage, but touchdowns almost always happen for running backs against the Titans. So I think that's a good plus matchup for him, and that's really the only thing that's missing from Aaron Jones' production this season. In his last 4 games, averaging 12.7 points per game, he's the RB23 in that span. On over 20 touches per game, the volume's there. 2.8 catches, 99 yards. The floor is always high, but only 1 touchdown is where you are left lacking. You kind of feel like there's some meat left on the bone in fantasy with Aaron Jones this season, but it's kind of just the nature of the Kevin O'Connell offense. The Vikings, historically under KOC, never rank better than bottom 10 in terms of running back touchdowns every season. Last year, they were like bottom 3. So even though Aaron Jones historically normally scores touchdowns, that was with the Packers. It's a different story with the Vikings. And given his chest injury, I do worry about it a little bit. But as long as he's healthy, it's a good matchup. I think that touchdown upside is there for him, and that's why he's at the top of this flex territory tier. I don't think he's a must start, but given his injury, that's kind of the only red flag. The matchup says he should score. So the ceiling's open. I do think Jones is a good start this week. At number 19, I have DeAndre Swift versus Green Bay. And yeah, at this point, we're definitely in a different tier altogether. He has had some really good weeks, and some of them are in this sample size. He is still the RB16 over the last 4 games, averaging 14.3 points per game. 19.5 touches, 2.8 catches, 99 yards. It's kind of the same as Aaron Jones, but he's also scored 2 touchdowns. The touchdowns have been a bit more consistent with DeAndre Swift. But I really worry about the Packers defense off a bye. I could see a lot of turnovers and honestly a shutout against the Bears. They are going to struggle on offense like they did last week against the Patriots. So really concerned about this offense's upside. I think they could have a massive letdown once again. And last week without a touchdown, we saw the downside for Swift, only 7 points, and a lot of that is dependent on yardage. So I do trust his floor for the most part. He should be a top 20 play. Given the volume, I still think Swift is worth starting, but I am worried about it. If there weren't 4 teams on bye, I genuinely think he would move down 4 spots. I think all of the starters on bye would be safer than DeAndre Swift. So at number 19, slightly misleading given the state of the position this week. Number 20, I have J.K. Dobbins versus the Bengals, who does get a bad matchup. I mentioned this last week with Derrick Henry. They are pretty good in terms of efficiency. It is rough against the Bengals. Only 3.2 yards per carry over the last 5 weeks, along with 19 receiving yards. That is definitely below average in terms of production. So they limit the running backs a lot, but they also give up a lot of touchdowns. They've given up 9 touchdowns to running backs in 10 games this season, 4 over the last 5 weeks. And similar to Derrick Henry, I do trust Dobbins to probably score. There's going to be a rushing touchdown on this Chargers offense this week. Last week, though, he did get vultured by Hassan Haskins, and that's not something to expect. I think that was a fluke, and I'm not going to worry about it. Dobbins still has 3 touchdowns in his last 4 games, and a lot of touchdowns on the season. So he's still their main guy, but with Gus Edwards on the field, his workload did diminish last week. Gus is a factor, but Dobbins is where all the upside rests in this backfield. So still going to trust him. He was the RB 19 over the last 4 weeks in points per game, 13.4. is what he averages in half PPR. 74 yards per game and a 75% chance to score a touchdown is pretty good. I'll trust Dobbins in my lineup as a top 20 play this week. At 21, I'm a little worried about Tony Pollard given the matchup against the Vikings. It does rank bottom 8, and the Vikings only allow 4 yards per carry, 3 touchdowns the last 5 weeks, and less than 80 rushing yards per game. So less than 17 points per game. League average is about 20.5, and it is not a good spot here for Pollard, who does not score touchdowns over the last 4, has not found the end zone, but is seeing 21 touches per game with 3 catches, 100 yards. His floor is usually pretty high, but last week we saw a more even touch split with the first week of Tyjae Spears returning to this offense. Maybe it was game script dependent. They were never leading in that game against the Chargers, but how often are they going to lead rest of season? I don't think it's that different than what you should expect rest of season. So with Tyjae injured a lot this year, some of Pollard's stats I think are a little misleading. I'm not convinced he actually sees 21 touches again this week, because last week he only had 13, 9 rush attempts, 4 targets, and Tyjae had 10, not far behind him. We heard about a 1A, 1B split in the offseason, and it never really happened. Pollard had the job from week 1 until last week. Tyjae got a lot more involved. So now that he's healthy, I think he will mix his way in, and definitely in the passing game, I do trust Tyjae to limit the volume for Tony Pollard. So Spears is going to be annoying. I don't think it's a guaranteed volume for Pollard anymore, and with that as a red flag, I don't think he's a locked-in top 20 play, but he has been a safe floor option as of late. I trust him to not burn you completely. So a decent floor play, not the best matchup, but should be safe for at least 10 points. Number 22, I have Najee Harris versus Baltimore, who is questionable for this game, but according to Mike Tomlin, there are no concerns. They're expecting him to be healthy for Sunday. So I think he'll play. I'm not worried about it, but I am worried about the Ravens matchup, who only give up 3.4 yards per carry for an average 66 rushing yards per game the last 5 weeks. But where you can attack them is in the passing game. They also give up 5.8 catches per game for 58 receiving yards per game. That is the second most in the NFL, only behind Denver to opposing running backs. So where you can really exploit them is in the passing game. And unfortunately for Najee, that is the role that Jaylen Warren occupies in this offense. That was at least the case last week. Jaylen Warren had been injured a lot of this season, never really healthy, but off the bye last week, Jaylen Warren had 16 touches, and 2 of them were the only 2 targets for any running back in this offense last week. So we know the offense likes to run the ball. It goes through the running back. And Najee still had 21 touches last week. He was more involved than Jaylen Warren. But it looks like it's more of a even split, at least like 60-40 moving forward. If last week is what we should expect, then Najee's not the clear only option in this offense. And he's not really catching many receptions. Over his last 4 games, only 1.3 catch per game. So if the Ravens continue to dominate and limit running backs on the ground, but give up a lot of catches and yards in the passing game, Najee might not be the best option this week. It could definitely pivot in favor of Jaylen Warren, who I do rank right behind him at 24. I see a legit volume for Jaylen to repeat this week. 16 touches was pretty legit, and now we know he's fully healthy. That was the main reason why he was so bad earlier this year. His health was really holding him back. So now that he's good to go, I have no concerns. 16 touches is going to be hard to replicate from any running back in the rest of the rankings. So love Jaylen Warren this week. I think both Najee and Jaylen are good flex plays this week, and I think Warren actually has the higher upside, but Najee remains the higher floor play. He's played very well, averaging 100 yards per game. I still think he deserves the higher rank, but both of them back-to-back this week. I think the game script could really benefit Jaylen Warren. At number 24, I have Nick Chubb at the Saints, who hasn't been good in his 2 games this season, only averaging 6.3 points per game, and that includes a touchdown, only 40 yards per game on just under 15 touches. His yards per carry is pretty bad, 2.7 yards per carry for Nick Chubb. Before his knee injury last season, he was giving you 5+ yards per carry every single season, no matter what. So it's possible this is the end of the road for Chubb this year. I don't think if he's this inefficient, they will hold on to him for too much longer. But this is definitely a matchup for him to capitalize off of the bye. He should be given as much volume as he can handle. As long as he's comfortable, I think he will stay on the field. But I think he could pay off for multiple touchdowns here. The Saints are the number 1 matchup in fantasy football at the moment. For running backs, they give up 137 rushing yards per game on 5.4 yards per carry, along with 10 total touchdowns over the last 5 games. That's over 30 fantasy points per game to this position. So Nick Chubb should capitalize if they get near the goal line. I think he will score a touchdown guaranteed this week, and there is the potential he scores twice. But I really have a hard time believing he gives you more than 80 total yards in this game. Jerome Ford should be healthy and will mix in a little bit, but we didn't see much volume for Ford last time we saw him, and I still think Chubb is their best running back in that backfield. So love him this week at number 24. I do think he's a good start. The matchup, though, kind of wasted. He's not the safest play. And 3 top 10 matchups are on bye this week. So kind of unfortunate. At RB24, though, I think he is a good start in Week 11. Number 25, I have Brian Robinson Jr. at Philadelphia, who is questionable, did not play not only last week, but also the week before, and he's not a guarantee to play this week. I'm not quite sure what will happen. He's probably a game time decision on Thursday, and I will update this ranking based on the practice reports and the news. I'll give you a start-sit call on Brian Robinson. So this ranking might change, but if anything, it would be going down, not up. The Eagles matchup is brutal. They rank as bottom 2 the last 5 weeks. The only worst matchup is the Kansas City Chiefs, and the Eagles are right there with them. Giving up 11.4 points per game is no joke. Only 60 rushing yards per game, 3.7 yards per carry, only 1 running back touchdown, and only 22 receiving yards per game. That is below league average. So very bad spot. I don't trust Brian Robinson to even get a full workload either. I don't think he plays in the first place. So I just ranked him for the sake of where I would put him. But honestly, I think Ekeler probably gets the start, and Ekeler would probably slot in right here as well, because the matchup is really bad, and I really don't trust them to score rushing touchdowns against the Eagles. They're going to be very inefficient even with the touchdown, and I don't see much of a ceiling in this matchup. So I'm respecting the Eagles defense. They've really stepped it up against the run. You can't do jack shit against them. So I worry about Brian Robinson. He is very touchdown dependent, but he also has like some of the highest touchdown odds this season. When he is on the field, he almost always scores a touchdown. So that's just the nature of the Cliff Kingsbury offense. They even gave McNichols a touchdown last week, and Ekeler scored 2 against the Steelers in his absence. So if he's on the field, I think you're probably going to start him. But given the matchup, he's a low-end flex play. I think he's one of the last guys I'd actually consider, given how good he's been this year. His last 4, he's averaging 13.5 points, and that ranks his RB 18 in that sample size. Brian Robinson is hard to bench, but at 25, definitely deserves a downgrade against Philly. Number 26, I have Travis Etienne at Detroit, and at this point, I would like to bench these players. I think this is the cutoff point. I think B-Rob is the last guy I want, but obviously, some of us are desperate and don't have many options. With 4 teams on bye, it's hard to get picky, so he does rank at 26. You could do a lot worse, and I'm not expecting Bigsby to suit up. If he does, I don't see a lot of touches, because Bigsby left last week's game in the early first quarter, I believe, and Etienne got back to dominating this backfield. But given Mac Jones is the starter, definitely some diminished upside, and Detroit is a very tough matchup on the ground. They started to leak a lot of yards when they lost Aiden Hutchinson, but it only lasts 2 weeks. After trading for Zadarius Smith last week, they got back on track, only gave up 55 rushing yards to the Texans last week. So they are difficult to run the ball against. I mean, even Joe Mixon had a rough time. So it's not like Etienne has earned your trust. He's been really bad this season, and I don't trust this offense at all. I doubt he finds the end zone. He's only giving you 6.1 points per game over his last 4. He has been terrible even when Bigsby has not been a factor. So I don't trust him at all, but assuming Bigsby doesn't play, Etienne is probably a top 30 option this week, but like I mentioned, I would much rather bench him if I can. Number 27, I'd also like to bench Rico Dowdle versus the Texans. If I can avoid it, I don't really want to bet on Cooper Rush and this offense. There's a chance we get Trey Lance under center, and that would really be a death nail. I would see very few checkdowns for Dowdle, and that's kind of the only saving grace for him. You don't expect much efficiency with this offense and overall game plan. Like, Dowdle's not that good, but he is giving you 3.8 catches per game, and that really helps him get to this 83 yards per game average. That's the only thing carrying him to a decent floor. But if he does score a touchdown, obviously you're excited. Without it, I definitely worry he ever goes over 10 points. Last week he only gave you 7, and it was a tough matchup against the Eagles, but still, that kind of feels like emblematic of his floor. You're not going to get that much better without a touchdown. So Rico Dowdle, not a good play. The Texans are a bottom 6 matchup as well, only allowing 4 yards per carry. I think they could really shut him down. The Cowboys should struggle on Monday night. So not excited here. Similar to Travis Etienne, I would much rather avoid it if I can, but given all the teams on bye, we are running out of starting running backs. Number 28 is where I rank Austin Ekeler. Assuming he's the backup, I still think he's going to be very much involved because Brian Robinson is not fully healthy. And on his limited volume this season, he has been very efficient. On 10.8 touches, he is averaging 53 yards per game in his last 4. He scored 2 touchdowns last week without Brian Robinson, and this team always looks to the running back near the goal line. So although it's a tough matchup, I still think there could be a rushing touchdown for Ekeler, especially given Brian Robinson is not fully healthy. But if B-Rob were to miss, I wouldn't bump up Ekeler that much. I would still see a similar volume for him. He'd still be in a committee. I think the main benefactor would be Jeremy McNichols, not Ekeler. I see the same kind of role for him regardless of B-Rob on the field. But he would be less likely to get vultured, so in that scenario, I would bump him up about 5 spots. Given I do think Brian Robinson will play, though, his touchdown odds are diminished, and that's why he's just a floor play. The matchup's not good, so without a touchdown, you won't really feel that good about it. I think 8 points is kind of the average projection, kind of the safe bet for Ekeler. So you could do worse. It's kind of bust proof, but it's not great. At this point, I'd rather bench him, but I think Ekeler has a safe floor no matter what for 8 points. 29 is Rhamondre Stevenson, one of the last starting running backs I have ranked, and I really have no idea what to expect in this offense. He's very touchdown dependent. He has 4 touchdowns his last 4 games, and some of those games he has multiple touchdowns. Sometimes his ceiling is massive, but if you take them out, he only gives you 6.9 points on yardage alone. So not trusting the ceiling at all, very touchdown dependent. And against the Rams, it's not a good matchup at all. They rank bottom 4, only giving up 1 touchdown to running backs the last 5 games, 3.3 yards per carry as well. So he's going to need to get it done in the passing game. That's where they're vulnerable. And I don't really trust Drake May to check it down that often. If anything, Drake May will just scramble and run and pick up the first down with his legs. So Rhamondre, not the safest bet. I do not like this matchup, and if he doesn't find the end zone, he will not pay off at all. So kind of like last week, similar to Ekeler, I see about an 8-point projection for Rhamondre, not expecting 10 plus. Number 30, I think, is the last guy I could talk myself into if I really needed to, just for that 8-point floor. It's Raheem Mostert versus Las Vegas. 8.2 last 4 games, just under 9 touches, only 1.3 catch, but 51 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a fumble. So it could be better. The fumble probably doesn't happen, and that touchdown is about 50-50 to hit. So that's what you're hoping for, and at this point, you're praying for that with every running back moving forward. At RB30, I think Raheem Mostert is the last guy I'm expecting to give me 8 points in a jam. But the Raiders matchup is a big reason why. The Raiders don't scare you at all, and there's a chance there's a blowout win here for Miami. They could have 5+ touchdowns available in this offense. So Mostert is interesting, but obviously very touchdown dependent. Similar to Rhamondre Stevenson, I'd rather pass, but you probably get 7-8 points from Mostert. Rest of the way, though, I think we've entered the must-bench tier. I think if you're settling for these players, you are depleted, whether by health or bye weeks at running back. So here are the rankings. I'm only going to give you 40 players this week, but here they are at number 31. I have Alexander Mattison at the Dolphins. The matchup isn't great. It was good entering last week, but they really shut down Kyren Williams, so they may have turned it around. And Mattison is not a safe bet to see the most volume in his offense. Last time we saw him before their bye week, Jahmyr White vultured him on the goal line, and that was a game where he was the 3rd running back in terms of touches. It was 9-7-6 in favor of Jahmyr White at the top, followed by Amir Abdullah over Alexander Mattison the last time we saw the Raiders on the field. So I really have no idea what to expect, but historically this year, the only running back in Vegas to have any value would be Mattison. But if Jahmyr is indeed healthy and has gained back his job, then perhaps Mattison is a liability. I doubt you feel safe, even if you knew for a fact Jahmyr wouldn't even play. So Mattison is definitely a guy I'm benching, but with all the teams on bye, he does rank at 31. I get it if you're going to settle for him. Number 32 is where I rank Cam Akers at Tennessee, who is clearly the handcuff to own in Minnesota. And Aaron Jones is one of the few running backs entering the week who's not 100% healthy, and there is a chance he is ruled out by Sunday. So Akers could be declared the starter. I don't worry about Ty Chandler, honestly, but Akers not the most explosive player, but he does know this offense pretty well. It looks like Kevin O'Connell really likes him. Dating back to his days with the Rams, he's played for Minnesota now the 2nd time in his career. He was with the Rams, then the Vikings last year, then the Texans early on, and then the Vikings traded to get Akers back in the building. So given Aaron Jones is nursing a chest injury, did miss the majority of the second half last week, and is also 29 years old, I see a role for Akers even if Aaron Jones is on the field. And this matchup is really good. The Titans have given up 8 running back touchdowns over the last 5 weeks. So there's some legit upside for Akers. I think he could score a touchdown. And in his last 4 games, he is averaging 50 yards from scrimmage on a per game basis. So you could do far worse. He put up 5+ points last week. And I do see double-digit touches. Last week, he had 13. So I think Akers is a must-add off the waiver wire. There aren't that many handcuffs who actually have a path to start on Sunday this week. So in the same vein as guys like Tyler Allgeier, Zach Charbonnet, there's handcuff value with Akers, and I think you can completely drop Ty Chandler if you had any stock in him. Akers would be the guy to pivot to if Jones can't go. But even in this matchup, in a good spot, I think Akers has some value, an interesting backup to start if desperate. And number 33 is where I rank Audric Estime, followed by Javonte Williams, the two Denver Broncos running backs, this week at home versus the Atlanta Falcons. And I have no idea what's going to happen in this backfield. Last week, Audric Estime had 14 rush attempts for 53 yards. Against Kansas City, that's actually really impressive. They are a tough matchup. But meanwhile, Javonte only had 3 touches and 2 of them were catches. I have no idea why he fell off a cliff so quickly, because honestly, I thought he could have lost his job a month ago, and then they kept giving him the ball. He played very well against the Saints, and it looked like he had some job security for a while. Meanwhile, Estime fumbled a few weeks ago and was getting nothing in terms of volume since then. So last week was a shocker. Maybe it was just game plan specific for Kansas City. The element of surprise definitely was in favor of Estime. So now it's back in favor of Javonte. I could see him definitely back as the RB1, but I kind of believe that Estime would take over at some point this year if you quoted me back in the early part of the season. So I think Estime is the guy to pick up. I think if you're starting one, it would be him, but I have no confidence in either. I think it's a major crapshoot. I think you'd need a touchdown for sure to have anything more than 5 points from any Broncos running back this week. So not a safe backfield at all. Similar to Las Vegas, I'd rather pass, but I actually trust Mattison a bit more than the Broncos backfield. That's for sure. Number 35, I have Tank Bigsby at Detroit, who is questionable. And I mentioned with Etienne, he probably doesn't play. But if he does, this is where I would rank him. Not a safe play at all. I still have no idea who is the RB1 in that backfield, because he got hurt early in the game. You would expect him to be the guy, but he never catches passes. And against the Lions, they're definitely going to need to throw it a lot. So I see very little usage for him, very low efficiency. Even if he is healthy, I don't think he's a good start at all. Number 36, I have Justice Hill at Pittsburgh, and the Steelers allow 40 plus receiving yards per game to opposing running backs. And you know that Derrick Henry doesn't really do that in this offense very much. So that's the role of Justice Hill. I do think he could have some work in this game, because I think it'll be a close one. I think the Steelers actually win, and Justice should probably get like 5 targets in this game. So an interesting option, but at this point you have to be very desperate. I would pass, but Tyjae Spears is probably worth picking up and adding to your bench. Last week he had 10 touches, 7 attempts on the ground, 3 targets, 3 catches, a total of 51 yards, and that's not bad, but it's also nothing special. He's still touchdown dependent, but an average of 7.1 points over his last 4 games, and 10 touches looks to be legit. So if he ever does find the end zone, you'll be happy, but at 37, I would bench Tyjae, just a bench pickup for the rest of the season. Only handcuff value behind Pollard. Number 38, also just a handcuff value with Ray Davis behind James Cook. Matchup is terrible against the Chiefs, but you never know. Ray Davis could get involved. He is talented. I like his upside. He has some game-breaking ability. He had a 60-yard touchdown catch a few weeks ago. It could happen again. At 39, I have Tyler Allgeier at Denver, who did get involved last week, but no touchdown. The ceiling's pretty capped, but sometimes the volume is there. I doubt it happens this week. The matchup was way better last week, as I expected. He did cap some of the volume for Kirk Cousins. At 40, I have Zach Charbonnet at the Niners, and in his last 2 games with Walker on the field, he's only averaging 4.7 points against San Francisco. So needs a touchdown. Without it, you'll be screwed, and I would rather pass, but he should probably be fine for 5 points. If you're just trying to avoid a bagel, Allgeier and Charbonnet are at the bottom of this tier. But these last 10, I'm just going to list literally on the screen. I have Jerome Ford, Zamir White, Jaleel McLaughlin, Braylon Allen, Samaje Perine, Roshan Johnson, Gus Edwards, Tyler Goodson, Jordan Mason, and Keaton Mitchell. There is a slight role for all of these players, but you're hoping for a touchdown. There's a good matchup for Jerome Ford, but I don't trust him at all. And all of these players could literally get like one touch, but maybe they also go over 50 yards and always have some vulture touchdown appeal. Even like Keaton Mitchell, John Harbaugh mentions he sees a role for him. So there's some potential. Keep him on the watch list, but definitely not starting them. Outside the top 30, I think you should bench almost every single running back, depending on your options. But these are the top 40 here on the screen, the only players I would really consider this week. And I really trust the top 17. I think all the way through David Montgomery, you are getting a very high floor. I think 15, 16 plus points is a lock. I trust all of these players like crazy. I think the elite tier would be the top 8 from McCaffrey to DeVon Achane. I think there's a 20-point projection that is reasonable to expect. But all the way through Dave Montgomery, I expect a touchdown or 100 yards from all these guys, and they should be very safe locks in your lineup. Starting with Aaron Jones, though, who has some injury concerns, I think we enter more of a flex tier rather than a low-end RB2 tier. And I think from Jones all the way to Brian Robinson Jr., those are the startable options this week. I think there's a safe floor to project, a few good matchups, but in general, kind of touchdown dependent and a little bit risky. I do worry a bit about this tier. But starting with Travis Etienne, number 26, through Raheem Mostert, I think those are the only guys you could even talk me into considering, but I would rather bench them. I really do not trust them at all. And beyond Mostert, starting with Mattison, I think you are absolutely in dire straits, probably going to lose if you have to start one of those players. So good luck. I'd much rather pivot to top 30 wide receivers beyond the top 25 at running back. And if you have any start sit questions, let me know in the comment section down below. I'm happy to answer all of those questions. But that's going to be it for this video. If you enjoyed, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. My name is Adam Riancho, and thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.